everybody, what is going on? I am Maximus Rex, and this is Big Baby Reviews. Check out my comic books, Big Baby and STARCRASHER at KINGCOMICS.CA. Today, guys, it is once again Keith Giffen Day, and we're taking a look at Lobo Infanticide, issue number 1, cover dated October 1992. So I was a little confused in my collection. There's an issue of Heckler that I want to review because I only have the one. If I find more before I'm done with Infanticide, I'll pick those up for sure. But that's all I have right now. But at least we'll be able to take a look at that. And right off the bat, understand, I've mentioned this before, I'm sure that I discovered Keith Giffen with Trencher. I was really into Image comics. That's when I was introduced to comics mostly. And I really got into hardcore comic book collecting was the Image boom. So when Keith Giffen showed up with Trencher, I bought that book. It was very strange to me. The art style was very strange. I wasn't sure what to think about it right away, but even as a kid, eventually kind of grew to love it. That first issue, the colors didn't really help that much, and then it got better within the rest of the miniseries. But definitely that's something that stuck with me and stuck in my mind. So, you know, what's nice now, me going through the reviews, of Keith Giffen's career, not every single issue, but, you know, through different periods from the late 70s to now we're in the early 90s, is I've talked about to see that artistic evolution that he's gotten, the changes that he's done. You know, the Defenders early 70s stuff is very Jack Kirby influence. He's kind of like a Jack Kirby clone. Then early 80s stuff, he discovers Alex Sinner and kind of copies that strip's style in his early 80s stuff. And even before that, between Defenders and that style, he's got what I would call the DC house style, maybe George Perez kind of influence from the very early 80s on, what did I review there? Legion of Superheroes. So it was really nice to track his evolution, his inspiration, you know, where he's copying a little bit, where he's kind of integrating it in, making it his own all the way throughout. That's one of the aspects that's been really interesting with Keith Giffen, and one that I really appreciate him for is all that experimentation. So, you know, having first seen that Trencher style, I wondered, seeing later on older Keith Giffen stuff, how he got to that, right? It didn't make sense to me. And the zeitgeist of it, I think, is this issue here. So first of all, I think that, you know, this cover maybe was drawn sometime around the middle or the end of the issue. You know, I don't know exactly how artists usually do this. You know, I know for myself, I'd like to save the cover for last because it's just one big image. It's more fun. It's maybe easier to draw, I guess. I don't know. But I like to do it that way. It's kind of like a little present at the end of having drawn all the storytelling pages within the comic. So I assume maybe Keith Giffen does the same thing, because stylistically, we start off this issue here, as you'll see with page 1, at a very Keith Giffen doing Simon Bisley kind of style, for sure. And that doesn't even last, I don't think, about half the issue. And then he kind of makes it his own, pulls it in real quick. We can kind of see that process happen within this book. And basically, I would argue that his Trencher style starts in this issue here. Now, publication date wise, right? This is issue number 1. So issue 2 comes out in November, 3 December, number 4 January 1993. The issue of Heckler I have is the last issue, issue 6. That comes out February 1993. So a month after this one. So I don't know exactly. He's clearly drawn some Lobo Infanticide as well as Heckler issues concurrently, right? And like I said, Heckler goes all the way to February, and the art style there, he's being inked by someone else, but you can see some of that, and when I review the issue, I'll talk about it. It's a little bit different from what he's doing here, but you can still see him going towards that direction. It's just the inker has a more slightly kind of controlled style, and it doesn't shine through as much as in this issue or on this cover. But looking at this, if you just swap out the head and throw in Trencher's head, that's basically Trencher. And, you know, the line work, the inking that he does on himself here, with that kind of, you know, rapidograph double line that just always continues, or pretty much throughout the form, right? He's not using, I mean, very little. I don't know if you can even call that hatching here and there, but basically, you know, pretty much no hatching or no shading or anything like that, leaving the line open. And color-wise, again, I think DC, for some reason, maybe they weren't quite using the computer coloring yet, but they were pretty advanced with the coloring at that point with the printing press. Really, whoever the colorist is, and I'll give credits when I open the issue, really does a good job of harnessing that style and making it clear and contrasting properly, more so than that first issue of Trencher that I mentioned again, which, again, I hate saying again a lot, is because of the colors, right? And the computer coloring added to that style. It just really kind of, I don't know if it clashes in that first issue. There's even still something that I like about it, and I'm talking about Trencher issue number 1, but definitely gets improved upon with the further Trencher issues, as I mentioned before. And in this issue here, I think the colors does a really good job of reining in that crazy rapidograph style that Giffen has developed in this issue, which again we're going to see for most of the 2/3, second, first third maybe is like Simon Bisley-esque, and then after that it transitions into this style somewhat seamlessly. I guess it does stand out to me once you've got the eye and you're familiar with the guy's art style. But enough about that. I guess I'll just open up and we'll see the transition happen by itself instead of me talking about it, as we have the visual aid right here. So yeah, if you're familiar with Simon Bisley and Lobo and Lobo's Back, those miniseries, very popular. They're what made Lobo popular, basically. Lobo created by Giffen and Slipher, that's right, in the earlier 80s, and the look wasn't quite exactly what Simon Bisley actually developed, right? So you're getting the Simon Bisley version of Lobo for sure. The posture, even the inking and the kind of anatomy and stuff, and the rough kind of hairy arms, the hook that he carries around. It's not quite Simon Bisley, but it's definitely Keith Giffen doing that style, not using perspective, just for lack of a better term, cartoony architecture and cartoony perspective, which is fun because you don't have to draw too many perspective lines. It's just someone who's very familiar with perspective, making wonky looking buildings, but that still work, in perspective and in layering an image. Plot art, sleazy Giffen, dialogue, greasy Grant, colors, easy Kinzierski, and he's the guy who colors Trencher, I think. We'll know for sure when we get there. So I wonder what was going on there with Trencher issue number 1, the colors. Maybe it was the first time he was using computer coloring and wasn't, exactly sure how it would turn out. It's always a little bit different on the screen that it ends up on paper, so you got to be careful there. Sometimes it's too bright once you print it, sometimes it's too dark, right? So definitely, like I said, a Simon Bisley-esque posturing, the Simon Bisley version of Lobo that we get here. And on these 2 pages, again, I definitely feel like he's looking at those issues of Lobo and Lobo's Back and basically trying to ape that style here. And he's doing it really well. I remember once I eventually got this issue, I noticed it right away. I'm like, man, is this, like, I almost could have thought that Simon Bisley had drawn the first part of the issue. There's something, especially it kind of stands out in this panel here, but there's something a little bit like Ronin and Frank Miller, what he did on Ronin. The sequences inside that kind of lab that they've built, the technological lab with the robots and stuff, the way this is inked and how the foreground figures are separated from the background with the thickness of the line here, just reminds me of Ronin a little bit. But yeah, this is such a Simon Bisley kind of character here with the crazy musculature, and assuming that's a woman, right, because of the bikini there. Maybe a little bit of an influence from Jim Carrey on In Living Color. That character. So all the way throughout here, yeah, again, I'm seeing a lot of Simon Bisley, the cartoony kind of style that he established on Lobo, the lack of perspective lines and stuff, and just kind of crazy wigged out action. Even the way he layers stuff, right, with kind of piping and material from the environment being in the foreground. There's just a very Bisley, typically Bisley style in the inking even. And like this character here, all these pops and stuff. But now, even the lettering there, I saw that on Lobo's Back, right? So clearly trying to create a transition there, because if you remember, if you read Lobo's Back, Lobo 2 miniseries, he didn't actually finish it, right? Christian Alamy is a French guy. Christian Alamy, I guess in English, actually did the last issue. And then this is, I think, the next miniseries after that. There's one-shots and stuff, but I guess to keep some sort of consistency at least, Keith Giffen has decided again to do that Simon Bisley kind of style. But here, I feel like there's a little bit more cartooning here in more in line with what Keith Giffen usually does. I love the silhouettes here, really good. And just that transition of color there in the background works really well. Kind of slows you down in that moment as all the rest of the art is pretty hectic. It gets you moving. And layout wise, I'll mention too, he's still kind of using pretty close to a 9-panel grid, which is kind of typical of Keith Giffen. Everything's kind of based on that basic grid, but he can modify it in many crazy different ways. But he's already not doing any kind of, ruler based panel bordering. This is pretty straight because it's been drawn for years, but it's still hand done, right? And a little bit shaky, and that definitely works for Lobo. Another interesting shot here, some Simon Bisley type violence with, you know, this guy's spine being pushed out the back of him. This, I say this guy, it's that muscular wrestling lady again. And yeah, again, pretty much in line with what we saw with Simon Bisley up to this point. He throws this in, which is fun all the way throughout. You get like these Charles Burns Peanuts type strips down here, right? Lucy pulling the football away from Charlie Brown. And then since this is Lobo, he basically just blows her head off. So the gag is usually the three first panels are really pretty much similar to the originals. And then the last one is kind of the resolution that is different from Charlie Brown's, the one coming from Lobo, right? And I'll point those out. There's a few more that are fun. So already here, I feel like there's a slight stylistic shift in the art, right? We're getting no shadows basically in these pages. We still had a bit of shadow and that rough hewn texture on Lobo. And here we're just progressively losing it as we move ahead. Another telltale thing, the double line that Giffen is using on Trencher, right? And a lot of times on the reflections, he'd make it even more obvious like he's doing here. So it feels like that's where he developed that. I don't feel we get stuff like this though on Trencher where the foreground elements are fully silhouetted, which work really well, mind you. But once again, yeah, the panel borders, nothing ruled. Everything's kind of chaotic, and that kind of leads to a very energetic line. He's a very experienced artist, so there's just something about it that just really works. There's a slight European vibe to it as well, right? Which I think is where Simon Bisley, not exactly European, because don't tell British people that they're European. They don't agree. We see them that way, but they would never cop to the fact that they're European specifically. They call it going abroad when they go to Europe, like France or whatever. And just, where was I going with this? Yeah, the European look and that very kind of moving, energetic line works really well. And again, how complicated this panel could get without proper coloring. And it's pretty easy to discern all the different elements you've got here. And just makes me laugh out loud when I see the very last bits in the back, which look like they're drawn by a 3-year-old, the clouds and stuff, but it just totally works. What just a great stylistic shift and a great experimenter with Giffen. And like this stuff here in the middle of this issue kind of almost feels in line with what I see in that Heckler issue, number 6, I'm going to review at some point. There's still, you know, a little bit of comic booky detail and you know, extra noodly lines and stuff that we're going to lose eventually pretty much completely on, or almost completely on Trencher. But, you know, we're kind of midway here. Then by the time we get to this page, I feel like we're pretty close to being fully in the Trencher style. But once again, what fools my eye is the proper coloring here. And basically what's happening through most of these panels is, you know, he's kind of picking a basic monochrome for the foreground element and a basic monochrome for all the background. So, you know, you've got kind of a purple here, right, for the bag in Lobo's hand, and then the back is blue, right? Better example here, maybe, well, this one here, right? So you got kind of the orangey tones for the background and the green tones here, a little bit of light yellow for the reflection here, but it really helps separate the elements there. Here, you know, it's not quite monochrome, but, you know, he's fully colored the figures in, let's say, fairly realistic colors, and, you know, the bag is yellow, the jacket is purple, red, or whatever, but then the whole background is blued out, and that really helps separate everything and keep the art contrasty and easy to read, you know. And yeah, as we move forward, again, we start to see those, you know, I love the shorthand that he uses, right? Like, just to be able to draw this freehand is almost like a sketchbook drawing, right? Something you would do in your sketchbook and not worry too much and have fun. And you're kind of just flowing and drawing stuff. That's what he did here for sure. The stars too, the balls, to just do these, you know, aesthetically, we'll say shitty stars, right? You know, but it totally works. What a great image here. And all throughout the series is we're going to get wacky kind of stuff like that. You know, very, like I said, this feels a lot like Trencher, like the experimental kind of gestating grounds that he used to develop some of the ideas of Trencher. It's almost like Trencher is Lobo to a certain extent, or they have very similar personality. Okay, so the skit where Charlie Brown gets the kite stuck in the tree, right? So we don't actually see the conclusion to that, but we can imagine it. And it's, listen, typical kind of Keith Giffen humor, right? And surrealist cartoony stuff that we get here. And because it's Lobo, he can go even further with it, obviously. So he does with the story and with the art, and just a great issue. So if you are someone who is into Trencher and you've never seen this, you should definitely check it out. And if you're someone who's into this and you've never checked out Trencher, you'll probably like that as well. Nice little touch here where he kills someone in the bathroom, and on the way out, he just added all this extra kind of, messy texture all the way around here, even in the panel a little bit on the walls and stuff. So that's the kind of stuff maybe I wouldn't think that he would do on Trencher, but he does it here. It is kind of a jarring aesthetic, but I think it works for what it's meant to be storytelling wise, right? And then he'll retry that, but in a different way, right? With kind of a band of stars here. And I think just this panel, once again, establishing, the planet they're on or where this is taking place, just looks amazing. Just some really different, interesting textures he's able to use for fairly typical images that we're used to seeing. He used splatter for these stars back here. I think that looks cool too. This is just great. And again, this genius. Oh, something I forgot to mention about the covers that I'm being reminded by the sun here kind of hiding behind the cloud, almost like he's scared of this woman here that we're going to learn about. Some of the cues are a little obvious maybe if you really pay attention, but we'll find out at the end of the issue who she is. The sun reminds me, I'll just go back to the cover real quick. Before ever seeing or buying this book, rather, I saw it at the comic book shop, and I remember seeing this and the pointed out high noon, and it's like the sun smoking a joint. I was right at that right age, a little older than when this came out when I saw it. So I was already probably maybe have tried or dabbled in the marijuana. So for some reason, when I was like that age, this was just the height of hilarity to me. And I just completely ripped this off, and I would draw this high noon type illustration like we got here all over my high school, my books and homework or whatever else was lying around that you draw on when you're in high school. Yeah, so again, I'm not going to get too much into the story now. I mean, it's pretty much basically explained at the end of it. So when I get there, I'll point out the basic plot points you need to know to enjoy this series. I love all this tech here. Again, with every artist, when they have their version of tech, I love in this style what he's doing here. It's messy, but it's also, I don't know, so evocative. There's just something, everything feels alive and moving with this art style. I just love it. Yeah, just something about it that's really kinetic and exciting. And yeah, so, he's received and he's pissed off the fact that he's been drafted into the army, right? So that's kind of the basic plot point, bringing Lobo into the action of a bunch of other into the action in the mix with a bunch of characters that we're going to meet on the next page. Another one of those Charlie Brown cartoons, right? Where, I mean, he cooks up the dog here. I don't think Charlie Brown would ever think of doing that to Snoopy, but it's a Lobo comic, fun. Another one of those shots, right, where he establishes a different planet, right, or a different setting, and just finds such interestingly graphic ways of doing it. And again, a little funny play on the sun there. So they're all meeting up here. This guy here, as you saw with that girl from before, they got similar kind of face markings. And what we realize this is kind of almost like an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, but as she's on the microphone here, greetings, my name is Sue Lemon, and I'm a Lobo bastard. Hi, Sue. So all of the concept of, the Alcoholics Anonymous association or comparison with the being a Lobo bastard is understood pretty quickly here. If you know the tropes of Alcoholics Anonymous and someone kind of giving a testimonial, right, to other people who are alcoholics. So in this case, these are all Lobo bastards. So implying that Lobo gets around a lot and has a lot of illegitimate children, and the life they're kind of forced to lead after that. She talks about it here, right? For too many years, we have lived as outcast pariahs, shunned by decent folk the galaxy over, right? Because they are Lobo bastards. Lobo, obviously not a figure in the DC universe that's very much liked or loved by anyone, I would think. So, he's, an anti-hero, but really just a bad guy. But he's really just a means to an end, really, storytelling wise, right? Just to do a lot of horrible stuff, which again, in comics, fine. It's fun. You can do that kind of stuff. Daddy must friggin' die. And that sets you up for issue number 2. And again, just all these renderings here on the microphones and stuff, very Trencher-like. So I look forward again to look for next review, look at issue number 2. and continue on our trek to Trencher, slowly but surely. So a few more issues of Infanticide and one issue of the Heckler, and we're there. Travis Charest, drawn like Jim Lee there early on Dark Stars. I've got some of those issues. I'll be looking at them at some point. And a little snapshot of what DC's putting out at that time. Norm Brayfogle, all right? One of the most underrated artists ever. Such a great artist. Solid. All right, there we go, guys. That is it for today's review of Lobo Infanticide issue number 1. If you're still watching and you're still supporting the channel, thank you so much. I do really appreciate it. If you're watching the channel but you're not subscribed, please do so below. It only takes a quick second for you, and it really helps the channel out, helps us grow, and it helps us get out there to other people who are into comic books just like we are. And speaking of comic books, I make my own. Check them out. There is, Big Baby and STARCRASHER. You can check those out at KINGCOMICS.CA. So everyone out there, thanks again for watching, and have yourselves an awesome day.
Like, subscribe, like, subscribe.
King Comics presents Big Baby, Volume 1, Issues 1 to 13, 204 pages of story and art. King Comics also presents STARCRASHER one-shot, 32 pages, cosmic sci-fi surrealist adventure. You can find these fine comics at KingComics.CA, at MaximusRex13 on Instagram, or on Facebook, MaxRex or Big Baby.